Colby in for Shepard Smith. This is the Fox Report, and the mothers of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman took the stand today, each testifying it was her son screaming for help in the background of a 911 call. Meanwhile, Zimmerman's lawyers asked the judge today to consider acquitting him of second-degree murder charges, claiming the state has failed to meet its burden of proof. Prosecutors fought back on that.
Two people involved here. One of them's dead and one of them's a liar.
Yes, he was there. Great. And yes, he shot him. There's no question about that. That's direct evidence. But as to the issues that count, was he justified in doing it? It's self-defense. Where's the direct evidence that it wasn't?
Now, the judge denied the request for acquittal. That was pretty much expected, and it's commonplace to ask. The defense then began to present its case. Joining me now, Judge Alex Ferrer, host of the syndicated TV program Judge Alex. Great to see you, Judge.
Great to see you too, Jamie.
You are a death penalty qualified Florida judge. I'm a Florida attorney, and Florida is a little bit strange. We'll get to that in a second in terms of some of the laws and burdens of proof that shift. First, I want to ask you about the two moms, though. Yes, it's compelling. Yes, there's 6 women on the jury. My question is, and let's listen, do they cancel each other out? Listen.
Ma'am, that screaming or yelling, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And who do you recognize that to be, ma'am?
Trayvon Benjamin Martin.
Do you know whose voice that was screaming in the background?
Yes, sir.
And whose voice was that?
My son, George.
And are you certain of that?
Because he's my son.
Judge?
I don't know that they cancel each other out because it's not a matter of whether, we have one mother and we have one mother, so it's a wash. It's a question of whether the jury believes one can really identify her son's voice or whether they just both want it to be their son, so they don't want to believe what the other side is alleging. And that's more likely the case. I doubt that either mother has ever heard their son screaming in a panic for his life. The voice expert who testified that people's voices are at a certain range, but men and women and children, when they are in panic for their life, their voice goes up to, I think he said, 600 hertz, and it doesn't really make a difference which one it is. So I suspect that's what it is.
Well, that doesn't
Nobody can tell whose voice that is.
Judge, that doesn't help us identify who it is. And the fact is that this judge said there will be no expert testimony on voice recognition of this 911 call, and then the prosecution did a brilliant thing, getting it in, setting it up, that yes, the science and the experts can't tell, but a family member can.
Family member might be able to. The science, she was right in keeping the science out. It was completely unreliable. It was a joke the way they came in and said that they could, the experts said they could identify it. The FBI analyst said absolutely not. We cannot scientifically identify this, but each side went out and hired their own experts who was going to say they knew who it was. What the experts said was scientifically we can't through a computer analyze it, but it may be that a family member who's familiar with the voice might be able to recognize it. But the reality is that you hear your son talking, you hear your son laughing, you hear your son crying. I doubt there are very few mothers who have heard their son screaming for their life at a point where their voice shoots up to that high of an octave.
Well, it'll be interesting to see after this case what the jurors say about that particular testimony. It certainly was very compelling to hear these moms. Speaking of unreliable, this medical examiner, he can't remember. And there was a Richardson hearing on whether or not the prosecution had failed to turn over certain evidence to the defense. That's what they call the Brady in Florida.
Yes.
And then he admits that he changed his records just weeks before when he was preparing to testify. Let me play his testimony. We have to react to this.
You changed your opinion 2 to 3 weeks ago about how long...
3 weeks ago, yes.
3 weeks ago?
Yes.
About how long Trayvon Martin may have lived after sustaining the gunshot wound?
Yes.
First, Judge, I think people want to know what is the relevance of how long Trayvon survived after he was shot?
It really isn't relevant, which is why O'Mara stood up and said this is irrelevant, and the judge overruled it. It would be relevant. I've never heard of a medical examiner like him. He sounded like a complete loose cannon. He sounded like he had a manifesto he wanted to read to the jury. He threw in there that he was suffering for up to 10 minutes, which, number one, I find hard to believe that with 2 holes in your heart, it would keep beating for 10 minutes. But I guess we'll hear whether that's agreed to by the defense expert, who happens to be the person who wrote the book that this expert relied on. And then on top of that, he just volunteered that he was suffering for those 10 minutes, which is something you usually only hear when the state is seeking heinous, atrocious, and cruel for the purpose of the death penalty.
Right.
This ME just seemed all over the place, changed his opinions, which experts typically cannot do before trial without notifying the other side because they've been deposed and they're relying on those opinions.
Correct.
Changed his opinion that he lived from 1 to 3 minutes to 1 to 10 minutes. He was just a mess. And then said opinions can be changed in an hour. So why should you ever trust the opinion he just gave?
Well, one other thing. He said 3 weeks ago he did another autopsy on a 40-year-old who had been shot in the heart by his father, and I could swear he said, and this was real self-defense. I mean, I found that prejudicial, if that's what I heard. I'm going to go back to the transcript. But the other thing that he said is when they asked about the fingernails and trace evidence that would show a struggle, which would clearly give direct evidence of who the aggressor was in that 6 minutes that really count here, they said they never took photographs of the palm of Trayvon Martin's hand. Now, I understand you can throw a punch this way, but you can also push someone back this way. He didn't even x-ray it, or the defense didn't even ask. What if there was a fracture? Wouldn't that be relevant? Have we lost the chance to ask that question?
Well, there are a lot of things that are going to be relevant. They're going to come out through the defense's forensic pathologists. For example, I expect we're going to hear that it's not unusual to not see bruising on the hands of Trayvon Martin, even if he was punching George Zimmerman, because he was shot and his heart stopped beating. And bruises develop from the movement of blood over time to the area that's been injured. So I think we're going to hear a lot of things we didn't hear from him.
All right, great work, though, by the defense in terms of credibility issues of the ME, who suddenly changed, didn't remember, and also left certain steps of this autopsy out. It was fascinating today, and as we see the defense continue to put on their case, we'll check back with you. Judge Alex, thank you very, very much.